Hello everyone, this is Naerina from 40k Theories, and welcome to this new episode of 40k Lore For Newcomers. For this episode, nominated on Patreon by Tobias8410, we will be taking a brief look at the fall of Cadia. This video is a brief overview for certain events that may be explored in greater depth within additional videos within the future. So, without further ado, let's begin.
Cadia stands!
The fall of Cadia was an event that occurred during the dying days of the 41st millennium, a period synonymous with the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler, the current War Master of Chaos and Lord of the Black Legion. The world of Cadia was one of the most strategically important and heavily defended worlds within the entire Imperium, with only Holy Terra itself boasting greater defenses. This was due to Cadia being located within a region of space known as the Cadian Gate, the sole stable corridor of space leading into and out of the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror, making it a site regularly plagued by traitor Legion forces as they attempt to launch their various invasions into real space. While such raids were common enough occurrences for Imperial forces to repel, their defenses would be tested to their limits when the forces of the Despoiler launched a full-scale assault against Cadia itself. Despite the stiff resistance presented by the world's defenders, Abaddon would ultimately achieve victory, and in the process deal a decisive blow against the Imperium of Man, one which it has yet to fully recover from. The final battle for Cadia itself is commonly regarded by many as being the single largest mobilization of Imperial and traitor Legion forces since the days of the Horus Heresy. And yet, it was not just humanity that took part in such a monumental conflict, for the forces of the Eldari and even the Necrons would lend their aid to the Imperium in an attempt to prevent the powers of chaos from claiming victory, although their efforts would ultimately be for naught. However, while the destruction of Cadia would itself be forever regarded as a monumental loss to the Imperium, in addition to being one of the many hypotheses regarding the birth of the colossal warp rift known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, mankind would nonetheless receive one last beacon of hope, which continues to endure and burn brightly, even to this day.
Do not strike until you are ready to crush the enemy utterly, and then attack without mercy, destroy every vestige of resistance, leave no one to work against you.
In late M41, prior to the onset of Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, a number of space hulks, gargantuan amalgamations of starships and other such spatial debris would begin manifesting throughout the Cadian sector, seemingly intent on breaking through the Cadian blockade and make their way into Imperial space. A number of strike forces from the Adeptus Astartes began boarding these hulks, intent on purging any potential threat that may have lain within, as such vessels were known to be utilized by traitor Legion warbands as they made their excursions from the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror into real space. Some of these vessels would be purged from within by Imperial forces, while others still would be utterly destroyed by the defensive batteries that lay throughout the Cadian sector. Despite this, a small number of hulks would break through the Imperial blockade, intending to strike at a number of key worlds and strategic military locations throughout the region. Soon after this, the Plague Claw, a vessel known to operate as part of the plague fleet of Typhus, the herald of the chaos god Nurgle, was spotted in the nearby Earthward system, its presence followed by outbreaks of disease and pestilence occurring upon the worlds it left in its wake. Admiral Quarren of the Imperial Navy launched a hunt for the Plague Claw, but his forces were ambushed by the entirety of Typhus's plague fleet near a region of space known as the Phenerax Dust Cloud. Quarren's fleet was forced to withdraw, though they would sustain heavy casualties at the hands of the traitors, leaving Typhus and his followers free to further spread the taint of Nurgle throughout the Cadia, Agrippina and Bellis Corona sectors. despite the best efforts of the Officio Medicae to stem the epidemic erupting throughout the region, disease would only continue to spread, leading to a vast number of doomsday cults appearing on those worlds hit hardest by the plague, declaring that they were being punished by the Emperor for their sins, and resulting in the local populace falling into anarchy as riots against Imperial authorities became more and more commonplace. The situation would only grow more horrific over time, however, as those who succumbed to the effects of the plague, now being dubbed the Plague of Unbelief, would rise from the dead, transformed into hideous plague zombies. This in turn resulted in a number of worlds falling to chaos, as Imperial forces had become sorely weakened by the challenges of combating insurgencies and treating disease that they were unable to withstand the assaults launched by Typhus and his followers. Small settlements and agricultural worlds within these sectors were raided by what was assumed to be traitor legion warbands as Imperial astropaths began suffering visions of impending doom, death, and destruction. In the ensuing confusion, many Imperial battle fleets, such as Battlefleet Agrippina, were forced to retreat to their bases, unable to cope due to the combination of civil unrest, raiders, and widespread plague. Within the ranks of a doomsday cult upon the world of Lelithar, a charismatic being known simply as the Voice of the Emperor would begin whipping the populace into even greater heights of unrest and religious fervor, encouraging them to openly revolt against the Imperium. The cult of the Voice would spread to a number of other worlds, resulting in a bloody conflict erupting between the cultists and those who remained faithful to the cult Imperialis, ultimately deemed of such severity that the Officio Assassinorum dispatched agents to terminate the Voice of the Emperor, although these attempts would fail. Despite the anarchy erupting throughout nearby sectors of space, the world of Cadia itself remained a bastion of stability. Despite this, and in large part due to the ever-increasing number of raids being made by traitor legion forces, the Lord Castellan of Cadia, Arzakar Creed, convinced the Imperial High Command to muster every regiment of Cadian shock troops upon the world in order to prepare for what he believed was an inevitable assault. However, one Astromilitarum regiment, known as the Volscani Cataphracts, widely known to be one of the most famed, respected, and battle-hardened regiments within the entire sector, turned against the Imperium during a welcoming ceremony upon the world, revealing that they had pledged themselves to the forces of chaos. This would lead to the Battle of Tyrok Fields, which saw the General Staff of Cadian Interior Command being slaughtered by the traitors. The Volscani would rampage through the Cadian ranks, having taken them completely by surprise, but would be destroyed thanks to a counter-offensive launched by Creed. Realizing that this was only a prelude of things to come, Creed dispatched multiple calls for aid and reinforcement, for the Lord Castellan, now acting as the world's governor militant, knew in his heart that the Despoiler's Black Crusade had begun.
I am the Archfiend, the Despoiler of worlds, and by my hands shall the false Emperor fall.
Following the Battle of Tyrok Fields, the world of Cadia began receiving substantial reinforcements, which not only included additional Astromilitarum regiments, but also warriors from the Adeptus Astartes, Adeptus Auroritas, and even from a number of knightly houses. As Cadia prepared for the inevitable Traitor Legion onslaught, the forces of Chaos continued launching various assaults throughout nearby regions of space. The Plague Fleet of Typhus would continue to ravage the Agrippina sector, whilst the forces of the Emperor's Children, led by Lucius the Eternal, would devastate the world of Belisar. A number of Alpha Legion cells would make their presence known throughout the entire segmentum, intent on delaying Imperial reinforcements from reaching Cadia, whilst the Iron Warriors launched a full-scale invasion of Medusa, the homeworld of the Iron Hands chapter. Eventually, every Imperial world that lay within 1,000 light-years of the Cadian Gate was embroiled in conflict, as the Imperium desperately sought to stand against traitor Space Marines, mutants, heretic guardsmen, and even the Dark Mechanicum, all of which in turn prevented Cadia from being further reinforced. With the space around the eye engulfed in conflict, Abaddon the Despoiler finally launched his attack upon Cadia itself. The War Master's forces began their assault by subjecting Cadia to an intense orbital bombardment designed to weaken the world's defenses before launching wave after wave of heretic Astartes, traitor guard, titan legions and demonic entities against their foes. While the traitors attacked as a nigh immeasurable horde, Imperial forces mounted a fierce defense, one that truly epitomized Cadian stubbornness and their defiance against all odds. Despite the Imperium's best attempts, reinforcements were encountering serious difficulties attempting to reach Cadia thanks to an increase in warp storm activity throughout the outlying planetary sectors close to the Eye of Terror. These warp storms, which were in truth the result of a ritual undertaken by the Wordbearers Legion, allowed demons to pour into the material realm and attack dozens of nearby worlds, a diversion which was intended to divert potential Imperial reinforcements from reaching Cadia at all. Despite this, the world would have its defenses bolstered thanks to the slow but steady arrival of warriors from dozens of Space Marine chapters over the course of the conflict, including warriors of the Black Templars, Blood Angels, White Scars, and even, if rumors are to be believed, the 13th Great Company of the Space Wolves, who had been lost within the depths of the warp since the days of the Horus Heresy. The forces of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, Grey Knights, and more battled against traitor legions and their demonic allies throughout the outlying sectors, as they also desperately sought to reach Cadia, although some of their number, such as the Dark Angels' 4th Company and several Space Wolf packs led by Sven Bloodhowl and Orven Heifel, successfully made planetfall upon the beleaguered world. In spite of all this, however, the Dark Angels chapter would also use this opportunity to try and hunt down the voice of the Emperor, believing him to be the fallen Dark Angel known as Cypher. It was around this time, at the opposite end of the galaxy, that a series of cataclysmic upheavals would erupt upon the Necron tomb world of Solemnus, destroying many of their exhibits and specimens that had been collected over the eons by the Necron Lord Trazyn the Infinite. Trazyn discovered that these apocalyptic disturbances were emanating from the Eye of Terror, prompting the Necron to make the journey to Cadia in an attempt to further prevent calamity from ensuing and, of course, to protect his collection. Meanwhile, Belisarius Cole, an Archmagus Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, was contacted by an Eldari Harlequin named Silandri Veilwalker, who instructed the Tech Priest to travel to Elfenor, a world which had been utterly ravaged during the 4th Black Crusade millennia prior. Here, Cole would discover a series of structures that were similar, if not outright identical, to the Cadian pylons, strange constructions older than the Imperium that were capable of repelling the very energies of the warp itself. With this information and significant prompting from Veilwalker, Cole also began making his way to Cadia to aid in its defense. Upon the besieged fortress world, Imperial forces were continuing to fight valiantly against Abaddon's forces, repeatedly driving back each wave of traitors that assaulted the world. Eventually, however, the Loyalists were forced to fall back to the bastion of Castle Kraf, one of the most heavily defended regions upon an already heavily fortified world. Abaddon launched a fresh assault against the castle, comprised primarily of traitor guardsmen as well as forces from the Iron Warriors Legion, the latter in particular being exceptionally skilled in the arts of siege warfare. It was then that Ursakar Creed would reveal one of his trump cards, a series of quote-unquote salvation bases that had been secretly mass-producing tanks and munitions, granting the Cadians additional reinforcements and firepower, driving traitor forces back and granting the Loyalists a much-needed reprieve, although at some point during the battle the world's planetary shield generators would become damaged. This brief respite would not last, however, as Abaddon's armada, led by the Blackstone fortress designated the Will of Eternity, launched a fresh attack against the Imperial fleet in orbit of the world. While the Blackstone Fortress was capable of destroying an entire world with its sheer firepower alone, Adeptus Mechanicus forces succeeded in repairing the Cadian shield generators thanks to both the presence of Xenos technology and the actions of the Space Wolves, who launched an assault against the fortress in an attempt to buy tech priests the time they needed to conduct the repairs. Abaddon would be forced to launch yet another ground assault against Khazar Kraf, with this newest wave being led by the demon prince Acanthos. Thanks in part to the presence of the Titans of Legio Volcanum, the traitors would begin to slowly gain the upper hand against Imperial forces, though both sides would sustain equally heavy casualties. Acanthos led an assault upon the world's planetary shield generator in an attempt to capture it, but thanks to the actions of Trazyn the Infinite, who would briefly take control of the Traitor Legion tanks to turn them upon their allies, as well as the arrival of a vast host of sororitas led by none other than Saint Celestine. In addition to a counterattack launched by Ursakar Creed, Acanthos' forces would be repelled. Despite fighting with ferocity, the Demon Prince would have his physical form slain by the Living Saint and her Gemini superior. As Traitor Legion forces were being pushed back on the ground, the Phalanx, the flagship and fortress ministry of the Imperial Fists, would appear in orbit of the world, unleashing a devastating barrage that not only tore through the Black Legion fleet, but also, thanks to the actions of Swen Bloodhouse warriors who managed to disable the fortress's shield, critically damaged and disabled the Will of Eternity, forcing the traitors to temporarily withdraw. Enraged, Abaddon vowed that he would personally lead the next assault. In addition to the Imperial Fists, Cadia would see yet more additional reinforcements from the Crimson Fists, the Knights of House Tyrannus, a host of Skitarii led by Belisarius Cawl, and even the spectral warriors known as the Legion of the Damned. Having secured a brief reprieve from the fighting, the various Imperial commanders convened a war council in order to determine their next course of action. Here, Belisarius Cawl revealed what he believed to be the Despoiler's true intentions, the destruction of the Cadian pylons, the loss of which would allow the energies of the warp to spread past the Cadian system and into the greater whole in the galaxy, swelling the Eye of Terror far beyond its current borders. After the council had dispersed in order to relay their orders to their troops, Cawl encountered Trazyn, who offered his aid in modifying and activating the world's pylon network to prevent the tides of chaos from growing greater in power. Despite his initial reluctance to work alongside what he deemed to be a Xenos abomination, Cawl would nonetheless accept the Necron's assistance. It was then that Abaddon would launch his next assault.
The Imperium is a weak old man, ready and waiting to be broken apart by his vengeful sons.
As the armies of the Despoiler launched their next assault upon Cadia, Abaddon, alongside his Terminator bodyguards, teleported directly into the command tower of Ursakar Creed, seeking to slay the supreme commander of the Imperial forces to strike a decisive blow against the Loyalists. However, instead of encountering Creed, Abaddon came face to face with Color Sergeant Jaron Kell, Creed's right-hand man. Kell would face off against the Despoiler in battle, buying Creed enough time to evacuate, though the sergeant would prove no match for the traitor and was swiftly slain. The traitors would then make their way into the tunnels leading to the world's pylon network, seeking to destroy the structures. Yet, as Abaddon and his forces approached their target, Trazyn activated a device known as the Tesseract Labyrinth, which began releasing a vast number of Imperial specimens from his collection, such as Loyalist Space Marines, a Custodian Guard, lost Imperial Guard regiments from the world of Tanith, and the Inquisitor Katerinia Greyfax to defend the pylons against Abaddon's forces. Despite this, the defenders were soon put on the back foot, overwhelmed by a newly summoned horde of demonic entities that launched themselves at the Loyalists like rabid beasts. Yet, the tide of battle would once again swing in the Imperium's favor, thanks to not only the arrival of the Space Wolves, including a vast number of Wolfen among their ranks, but also the appearance of Saint Celestine and her retinue, who directed their fury against Abaddon himself. As the battle raged around them, Trazyn and Belisarius Cawl eventually succeeded in activating the pylons, which began to steadily repel the energies of the warp, active upon and around Cadia, even to the point where the Eye of Terror itself began to slowly close. However, this would also result in Psykers, both loyalist and traitor alike, being unable to utilize their abilities, as well as demons and the Legion of the Damned being banished from the material realm. Celestine herself was substantially weakened by the activation of the pylons, causing her to collapse in pain. As Abaddon attempted to land the killing blow upon Celestine, he would become distracted by the arrival of Imperial reinforcements. Ursarkar Creed would charge into battle against Abaddon, though he would prove to be no match for the Despoiler. While Abaddon focused his attention upon Creed, Celestine impaled the Despoiler through the back with her sword, forcing him to teleport back into his flagship in orbit. Abaddon, enraged, would then order for his Black Legion to retreat, but would commit one last final act of spite before doing so. Ordering his men to attach engines to the wreckage of the Will of Eternity, Abaddon would crash the ruined Blackstone fortress into the very surface of Cadia before having the aptly named Planet Killer, the most powerful vessel within Abaddon's fleet, unleashing a concentrated bombardment upon the world. The devastation caused by both the impact of the Blackstone fortress and the firepower of the Planet Killer would result in the world beginning to fracture, causing the Cadian pylon network to falter. Celestine, now having returned to full strength, would lead the Imperium's retreat from the world, whilst Creed and the warriors of the 8th Cadian Shock Trooper Regiment would hold the line, battling fiercely against the returning demonic hordes. Shortly after this, however, Creed would collapse from his wounds, only to disappear shortly thereafter, with many believing that he had been spirited away by Trazyn the Infinite and added to his collection upon solemnness. Imperial vessels would break orbit from Cadia, leaving the world to its fate as it withered in its death throes. While Cadia was rendered a lifeless husk, Abaddon's satisfaction would be short-lived, for his various sorcerers and seers would reveal the Despoiler that Cawl carried an artifact of great importance, one that could grant the Imperium a significant advantage against the traitor legions. Abaddon would then order for the Black Legion to pursue the Archmagas, who, alongside many of the Imperial survivors, had retreated to the frozen moon of Calices at the advice of Saint Celestine, who had a vision about salvation awaiting them upon its surface. As the Black Legion launched their attack, Imperial forces would prepare to make their last stand, only to receive aid from an unexpected source. A webway gate would activate, disgorging a vast warhost of Eldari that forced the traitors to retreat. The remaining loyalists would then flee into the depths of the webway, and while they may have survived the battle for Cadia, the world itself had not. The most heavily defended world within the entire Imperium of Man, second only to Holy Terror itself, had finally fallen. While this proved to be a devastating blow to the Imperium, hope still remained, for at the opposite end of the galaxy, within the heart of the Ultramar sub-empire, the avenging sun would soon return to the world of the living, bringing with him that which had long been thought lost: hope. And that concludes this edition of 40k Lore for Newcomers. If you like this video, consider supporting us on Patreon for more content. To those that are new to 40k, we hope you learned something. So, leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.